So first, I'd like to say a big thank you to Candy, Soul and Soil for this Witchlit Anytime tag. I think it's really great. I was very excited to do something for this because I had just finished reading, I'm holding this up, this isn't the book, The Goatfoot God. I'm holding this up because this is my notebook. Unfortunately, I read the book online and I don't have a copy to show, but I'll try and put the picture of the cover. The copy I read was a 1989 copy, but it was actually first published in, I think, 1936. I'm fairly sure that's correct. Oh, and also to Bookish Travels, I believe they have done this Witchlit tag between them. So this is the Goatfoot God by Dion Fortune, and it is, for me, it's the first non-fiction work of hers that I have read, and I've always sort of been keen to read some non-fiction of hers. I've read a great deal of fiction. No, that's wrong. I've always been keen to read some fiction because I've read a great deal of her non-fiction work, not all of it. Yeah, so I was very interested and very excited to read the book and to also have a chat about it now on this Witchlit Anytime tag. The story itself, if I run through that briefly, that's Pew Paston, and he lives in Mayfair in London, and the story is set in roughly the time that it was written, so I guess the early 1900s. And Hugh has just lost his wife, and he lost her in rather slightly scandalous circumstances for the time. And of course, him being quite a high society man, there's a lot of interest in this situation, and he's hit pretty hard by the whole thing, not only losing his wife but the circumstances in which it happened. So this is where the story begins, with him just returning home from the funeral, and before long we find him wandering the streets of London. He doesn't quite know what to do with himself. He's been to his club, but he feels very uncomfortable there because of the connotations of the way in which his wife lost her life, and so he goes off into London, just wandering the streets, and he finds himself in a rather seedy area of London, and there he comes across a bookshop, and he meets a rather enigmatic character who is the owner of the bookshop. At some point during this, we find that Hugh has decided, for some reason, that he wishes to invoke Pan chat, and it just so happens that the bookshop owner is quite knowledgeable about occult matters and esoteric things, because at one time he was in fact training to be a priest. So the two of them have lots of conversations around this theme, and into the mix comes Mona, who is obviously the romantic interest for Hugh, and from then on all sorts of adventures happen. It's at some point during Mona and Hugh's association that he comes into contact with an entity or a spirit called Ambrosius, and he's very much taken. He's very affected by this this entity or spirit. We're not quite sure what Ambrosius or who Ambrosius is, but he's a character from centuries before who appears to have some strong connection with Hugh himself. And there begins the crux of the book. Interesting, really, because in the blurb for the book it talks about, let me just see if I can, I've got in my notes, the theme of the book, says the blurb, is concerned with man-woman relationships and how they need to, the man and the woman need to be representatives or representations rather of the god and goddess. That theme does run through the book, but I don't think it's the major theme personally. And what I found was the major theme of the book was the question about Hugh's psyche and whether he was mentally unwell as a result of stress and all these more physical things happening to him, or whether indeed he had become possessed by the spirit of Ambrosius rather, or whether Ambrosius was some kind of past life entity, and that was the going to and fro about these things, and the narrative was very concerned with these issues and indeed how they play out in the real world, because Hugh's family were keen to have him sectioned. I don't know if that was the term back then, but they were keen to have him sectioned so that they had control of his money, of his finances, of his estate. And so there were some very physical repercussions, but I'm sure would still stand today. It also raises the question of this today, and I don't, to my mind, I could be wrong, but I don't think things have moved on at all. In the time that it was written, there was no acknowledgement that these psychological issues could also have an esoteric source, or that there could be an esoteric source involved, so that it was psychological as well as, and I think that still holds true today. I would not be surprised if there are people populating psych wards today who also have some sort of esoteric experience troubling them, as well as psychological or neurological. I think that's probably still the case. Dion Fortune certainly made the case for that, and I know she has spoken about this elsewhere in her non-fiction. She's certainly spoken about this, how it can be a combination, and within the narrative this is what she presented, that it wasn't simply a psychological issue with Hugh. It was a combination of psychological, of stress and anxiety and all of those factors, as well as esoteric issue. And that was the conclusion which she presented in the book. I think she threaded Pan through the story, the themes of Pan through the story, and she went into some detail about Pan as a deity, and she called him Vitamin P and talked about how we all need a little more vitamin P in our lives, but the caution is not too much, because too much, you can overdose on this sort of thing, which I thought was really rather lovely. So those were the themes of the story. What did I feel about it? I really enjoyed it. The language is very accessible for today's audience. She writes so beautifully. She's very eloquent. And it is old-fashioned. There can be no doubt about that. But if you enjoy, or if you can overlook that, I think it's a very enjoyable read. I was particularly looking for hints of information that she may not share in her non-fiction, because she states quite clearly in the book itself that, I think there's a place where one of her characters says authors will put things into non-fiction that they are reluctant to put into, as she says, sober prose. And to be honest, I don't really think I picked up anything of that nature, which I was a bit disappointed about. And it also made me wonder, fiction, what prompted her to write fiction? She was more prolific in her non-fiction work. Maybe she just had stories in her head which she wanted to share. Or maybe there was another reason. I'd love to ask her. I'd have so many questions for her. So overall, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I am definitely going to be reading some more of her fiction. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was a page turner, but it was thoroughly enjoyable.